3 scary true Christmas horror stories. This is Mr. H. You're listening to Masked Horror. The Christmas Eve Mystery. It was Christmas Eve, and I was about 6 or 7 years old. Like most kids, I couldn't sleep, the excitement of Christmas morning bubbling inside me. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to imagine what gifts might be waiting under the tree. I've always had trouble falling asleep, even as a kid, but that night felt different. I just knew something wasn't right. The silence in the house wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, like the walls were holding their breath. I remember closing my eyes, trying to force sleep to come, when I heard it. A noise, faint at first, but unmistakable. A loud, scraping sound coming from above. It reminded me of someone dragging a metal rake across pavement. My eyes shot open, and my heart began to pound. The noise wasn't random. It moved deliberately from one side of the roof to the other side, slow and steady, like whatever was up there wanted to make its presence known. I froze, unsure of what to do. My first thought was Santa. I know it sounds silly now, but at that age, it seemed plausible. Then, as the sound grew louder and more grating, my mind shifted to something worse. My chest tightened as I realized I couldn't stay in my room alone. I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room, my footsteps loud enough to wake them. "Someone's on the roof," I said, almost yelling. My mom groggily sat up, rubbing her eyes, while my dad sighed and pulled himself out of bed. "It's just the wind," he said, his voice calm but dismissive. "Maybe some snow sliding off." I insisted it wasn't, that it sounded deliberate, but they brushed it off. My dad checked the windows and listened for a moment, but the noise had stopped. "Go back to bed," they said. "You'll feel better in the morning." Reluctantly, I went back to my room, but I couldn't shake the unease. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, jumping at every creak and groan the house made. At some point, exhaustion won, and I drifted off, just as the first hints of dawn began creeping through my window. The next morning, I woke up to sounds of my parents talking outside. I threw on my boots and went to join them. When I stepped into the yard, I noticed bits of debris scattered across the snow, pieces of wood and what looked like shingles from the roof. My dad stood there, scratching his head, trying to figure out what had caused the damage. That's when I saw the scratches. Deep, jagged gouges ran across the shingles, like something had clawed its way from one end of the roof to the other. They weren't random, they formed a clear path, as if something heavy had dragged itself across. My dad dismissed it as a tree branch falling during the night, but that explanation didn't sit right with me. There wasn't a fallen tree branch on the ground. "It's nothing," my mom said, ushering me back inside. "Let's not ruin Christmas." But it stayed with me. As I got older, I started to notice other strange things. Neighbors would mention hearing odd noises at night or finding footprints in the snow that started and ended in the middle of their yards. Pets went missing more often than you'd expect, and there were whispers of shadowy figures seen darting between houses late at night. I tried to rationalize it all, or maybe I had let my imagination run wild that night. But a few years ago, I stumbled upon an article from around that time. It detailed a string of break-ins that occurred during the holidays. To this day, I don't know what caused those scratches on our roof. Maybe it was a person, maybe it was an intruder, maybe Santa does exist, who knows? Maybe it was something else entirely. But every Christmas Eve, I still lie awake, and every so often, I think I hear it, that slow, deliberate scraping sound, moving from one end of the roof to the other. A flicker in the darkness. Christmas Day was supposed to be perfect that year, even though it wasn't the same without Max, our dog. He'd passed away a few months earlier, and the house still felt empty without him. To honor his memory, We lit a single candle and placed it in his favorite bowl under the Christmas tree. It was something my mom said we'd always done for loved ones we'd lost, a family tradition. I remember sitting on the couch, the tree glowing with lights and ornaments. The air smelled like pine and baked ham, and my little sister Emma was tearing into her presents. Everyone was laughing, caught up in the holiday spirit. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was okay, even with Max gone. Hours passed, and the day turned into evening. We had eaten too much, played with our gifts, and started settling into the kind of lazy contentment that comes after a good Christmas. Mom was in the kitchen cleaning up. Dad was flipping through a book he'd unwrapped, and Emma was curled up on the floor with her new doll. I was playing a video game. The fireplace was lit, and the tree's lights in the formal living room cast warm patterns on the ceiling. The tree looked so beautiful in that space. I never touched that room or sat on the couches due to the strict orders from my parents. I never understood it, but we'd never used that room and only ever put the Christmas tree in there every year. Then it happened. Emma screamed, a sound so sharp and sudden it made my heart stop. I looked up to see the tree engulfed in flames, fire climbing faster than I thought possible. The candle had tipped over, catching the dry branches and tinsel like kindling. Within seconds, the entire tree was a tower of fire, the ornaments popping and exploding in the heat. Get water, Dad yelled, but it was already too late. The fire spread to the curtains, the carpet, the walls. Smoke filled the room so quickly, it was hard to breathe. Mom ran in coughing and panicking as she grabbed Emma and tried to pull her away from the flames. We scrambled, grabbing anything we could to fight the fire, but nothing worked. The heat was unbearable, and the air was thick with black smoke. That's when Dad realized the smoke alarms weren't going off. We'd turned them off earlier while cooking, and no one had remembered to turn them back on. The fire moved faster than we did. Within minutes, it had consumed the living room. Outside, Dad shouted, and we ran, choking on smoke as we ran outside. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. The firefighters arrived eventually, but by then, it was too late for most of the first floor of the house. We made it out, barely. The neighbors stood outside, watching in horror as the flames consumed everything we owned. The smell of burnt wood and melted plastic lingered in the air for days. I'll never forget that Christmas, and we never used real candles again. But even now, every time I see a Christmas tree, I can't help but feel a tightness in my chest. That day wasn't just about losing a home. It was a reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly joy can turn into terror. To this day, I still miss my friend Max, but some traditions aren't worth keeping, no matter how much they mean. The Christmas night knock. It was late on Christmas night, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. The house was warm, the soft glow of lights still flickering on the tree. My parents, my little sister and I were winding down after a long day of gifts and food. Our cat Daisy was curled up on the couch, purring softly. It was peaceful until that knock came. It wasn't a gentle knock. It was loud, sharp, almost angry. We all froze for a moment, exchanging uneasy glances. Probably a neighbor or family member, my dad said, getting up to check the door. When he opened it, though, there was no one there. Just 3 dead mice lying on the porch. They were bloody, their small bodies limp, and unnervingly arranged in a perfect design. My mom was in horror, and my sister started to cry. "What kind of sick joke is this?" my dad muttered, stepping out to look around. The street was empty, the snow undisturbed. Then, out of nowhere, Daisy sprang off the couch, darted to the porch, and snatched up the mice one by one. Before we could react, she bolted into the night. We searched for her for hours, calling her name and scouring the neighborhood. I always enjoyed a white Christmas, But this was not the ideal time for one. The snow fell heavier, covering the ground and erasing any tracks. By midnight, we were panicked, but there was no sign of her. The next morning, Daisy was sitting at the front door, waiting to be let in like nothing had happened. Her fur was clean, her eyes bright, and she had that smug, satisfied look only cats could pull off. We were all relieved to see her again, though none of us could shake the eerie feeling from the night before. She curled up on the couch, purring like it was just another day, as if she hadn't vanished into the cold night, with 3 bloody mice in her jaws. I'll never forget that Christmas night, but hey, at least Daisy had a Merry Christmas that year.